Yo guys, welcome back. Today we have a trade to announce, and a big one between the Los Angeles Kings and the Minnesota Wild, involving Kevin FIALA and a big trade package going back to Minnesota. Now, when it comes to this big deal, what are the trade details and which team wins this trade, the Los Angeles Kings or the Minnesota Wild? Watch till the end for all of my thoughts and the full trade details. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of you guys are not subscribed, so if you like hockey content, this channel is the place to be. Now, we've been talking about a Kevin FIALA trade for really the past few months, with Kevin FIALA being a part of that Minnesota Wild core, having such a good last season. He was really a player that, with his RFA status and Minnesota not being able to really afford him after this last year, there was always questions over whether he'd be a fit long term. And after last year, he had a fantastic season in 82 games, 33 goals, 52 assists for 85 points, one of the premier offensive playmakers and just overall producers in the NHL last year, and definitely one of the hottest commodities left on the market. And when we look at the actual trade details themselves, it's pretty crazy to actually see this trade happen. Now, when it comes to a Kevin FIALA trade, the actual team to get him is the Los Angeles Kings, which I've been kind of linking for a while here. I knew the Kings would go for a couple of big moves in this offseason, but they wasted no time going after a big guy, and Kevin FIALA is going to be such a good addition to them, but we'll obviously talk about that in a second. When it comes to the actual trade details themselves of this deal, the Minnesota Wild will end up giving Kevin FIALA away to the LA Kings, or at least giving away their rights. He, of course, being an RFA, LA will likely end up signing him. In exchange, this is the big one, the Minnesota Wild will end up receiving the LA Kings 2022 first round pick and defenseman, USA defenseman Brock Faber. Now, when it comes to the LA Kings pick, that in this draft at least is 19th overall, and at that range, although it's pretty wide open, there's some pretty great players there that I think the Minnesota Wild would love to have. And of course, with Minnesota, they're in a strange position. They already gave up their own pick, or when it comes to and actually they didn't, it was 24th overall, so they'll have 24th overall and the 19th overall pick as well, so they'll have picks around those ranges. And considering what Kevin FIALA was potentially going out there for, I know some people might be disappointed that it's not to a second overall pick caliber like some people were suggesting, but I didn't think Kevin FIALA was going to get that much on the open markets, and he just gets a first round pick and Brock Faber. Now, here's the thing, I am a big fan of Brock Faber, and I feel like in Minnesota, the fit there is going to be really interesting. On paper, I think some people might be disappointed with the return to Minnesota, but I would say personally, considering the fact that Kevin FIALA likely wasn't going to re-sign, Minnesota didn't have too much leverage, I actually like this deal for both sides. When it comes to Brock Faber, I'm a pretty big fan of him. At age 19, he's been playing with the University of Minnesota over the past couple of years, was a second round pick by the Kings, 45th overall back in the 2020 NHL draft, and since then has played well in the NCAA this last year with Minnesota. He in 32 games got 2 goals, 12 assists for 14 points. Personally, although the production isn't that marvelous, there's more than meets the eye when it comes to Faber's game. He's one of the best skating and puck handling defensemen out there prospect-wise in the NHL, and I think in terms of high-end talent, in terms of high-end speed, he's going to dictate play pretty well at the NHL level, even if he might not be the greatest defensively or have as much size as he probably should on his frame. But this is a player that I think could be a very solid and consistent skating middle pairing defenseman, and as well you get on top of that a 19th overall pick, which in this draft isn't spectacular, but will still likely get you a solid NHL player. I don't think is the worst return in the world. There's obviously more they could have gotten maybe if they had Kevin FIALA under contract, but again, considering Minnesota's situation of him not having a deal and still being an RFA, I doubt that they would have gotten a second overall pick like people were thinking with New Jersey, or a top 10 pick in this draft. They instead go for a top 20 pick, a top 4 defenseman, and to me, considering Minnesota's situation, I think that's about as good as you can get. And especially considering Minnesota as well was looking for players that were young, players that could step onto the roster immediately. Brock Faber, I think if he stepped onto the Minnesota Wild next year, could be NHL ready and could develop alongside that Minnesota D-core into a very solid part of things. I mean, Minnesota's defense is already really interesting. They already got some big high-end guys, and I think Faber could definitely compile alongside those guys and really learn from them as well. There's a lot of potential in Faber's game, and I think Minnesota's game overall and their style does fit his quickness and his consistency quite well. So I think Faber will do quite well with Minnesota, and we also heard beforehand with some rumors with LA last year that they could be moving Faber. He ends up getting dealt here, and I think Minnesota is a pretty great fit. Now at number 19, there's a few options they could could go for at that spot that I would love. If you got Brad Lambert available, that would be sick. You also have other players maybe in that range that I think Minnesota might go for. I mean, Connor Geekie is one that if he's not taken will be a pretty interesting pick for the Wild, even though I think he will be taken before that. You also got some other players that I think in terms of their overall system could fit well. You got, of course, players that I love like Noah Ostlund, who I think will be amazing with that Wild core. But honestly, considering the Wild's prospect pool is already so good, you just add to the riches there. And again, considering what Minnesota's situation was, to get a top 4 D-man and likely another pretty good top prospect back isn't the worst thing in the world, especially considering Kevin Fiala's best days are probably what we saw last year. So looking at this trade and looking at both teams at hand, to me, I think it benefits both sides. For the LA Kings, they're entering into a different era of Kings hockey. They obviously went through that mini rebuild, and we saw how they were building up that prospect pool into something special, and it absolutely was. But now this next year is truly the year to take it up to that next level, to take everybody into fruition. Hopefully you see Alex Turcotte step up in a big way. Hopefully you see other prospects like Quinton Byfield step into bigger roles. This next year is really going to see, I think, the LA Kings strut their prospect pool, their youth, and their up-and-comingness. They already, of course, made the playoffs this last year and surprised a lot of people. Even though I had them being a playoff team before the season started, they were a pretty surprising team for most. But the LA Kings are trending in a fantastic direction, and it's only up from here. Especially adding Kevin Fiala onto that offense, I think is especially what was needed. I've been linking other wingers to the Kings and other players alongside it, but Kevin Fiala was one of the best options available, if not the best the Kings could have realistically gotten. And I'm kind of surprised as well that we didn't see Alex Turcotte involved in this trade or somebody else involved in this deal. For the Kings, even though, yes, you give up a big-time defensive prospect, which does hurt quite a bit, there is a little bit of a weakness in their prospect pool defensively. At the same time, you still have so many riches that at this point, adding a above a point per game player in Kevin Fiala is fantastic. And considering the offensive need the Kings have, I think it's a perfect fit, especially with his playmaking and overall offensive style there. And alongside Anze Kopitar, I would love to see that type of connection. So I think the LA Kings win, and even though the Wild don't get a crazy amount of assets back, they do get two very good ones in Brock Faber and a 19th overall pick. To me, even though I would say the LA Kings win this trade more, considering what we could see as well with the contract, considering again what Minnesota was going through, I think the return is quite solid for them too. So I would give the edge to the Kings in terms of the winning teams, but still, I don't think Minnesota gets robbed here whatsoever. But I want to know in the comments down below what you guys think of this trade. Who do you think wins, the LA Kings or the Minnesota Wild? What do you think of this return? What do you think of Fiala going to the LA Kings? Let us know your thoughts down below. Of course, share this video with your friends, subscribe, hit that like button, hit that notification bell, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.